Hi, I'm Jonathan Otero, and welcome to another episode of Leading During Crisis. On this episode, we have a very, very special guest, Jeff Roberts from Cobham, who is going to bring a lot of substance when we talk about IT leaders who are leading during crisis. And a really brief intro on Jeff and who he is. As Vice President of IT in North America for Cobham, which is a multi-billion-dollar British-owned aerospace and defense company that is most famous for, of all things, check this out, developing the technologies for air-to-air in-flight refueling. How cool is that? Jeff is responsible for the delivery and oversight of IT for Cobham's North America locations. And as the face of IT to the senior business leaders, Jeff has filled the North America CIO function for the last 3 years and has been directly responsible for transforming IT service delivery in North America to more of a regional model, which is awesome. So extensive knowledge with over 20 years in aerospace and defense IT. Jeff has extensive experience not only on the technical side, but also on the business side of IT as well, which is why I asked him to join the show and be a part of this and get his take. Jeff is also well-versed in cybersecurity frameworks, which we're going to get into in this episode, and the associated information security concerns that go along with his field. Jeff's latest challenge has been securely delivering a work-from-home model to employees across sites in North America. So, I mean, who better to have this type of conversation? So let's bring in Jeff right now. Jeff, how you doing? Thank you and welcome to the show.
Pretty good, Jonathan. Thanks for the opportunity to share some insight. Should be a good chat.
Absolutely. So let's talk. Let's dive right into that, right? Because we're talking about leading during crisis, right? And I mean, we're talking about the pandemic being a massive disruption to a lot of the businesses. And you had to face two massive disruptions because just recently your company was acquired by a private equity firm a few short months prior to the pandemic. So you're
Correct.
dealing with two different type of disruptions in the marketplace and to your business. So, going to we always say, right, the constant change in IT is change, right? That's the constant that we can always account for. So, I mean, who better to talk about change when when we're talking about what you had to go through from your business perspective. So, and furthermore, being in aerospace, you guys are more regulated than any typical commercial enterprise account usually would be anyway, because,
Absolutely.
as opposed to just having a good practice, quote unquote, I don't know if you can see that there, a good practice of cybersecurity, your requirements, you're mandated by a higher level. So
Correct.
let's start off with digital transformation, how you're dealing with that, but also having to manage that digital transformation with all these things going on. So how did you manage that going forward?
Yeah, that's a good segue. Thank you for that context because I think it's helpful to understand both pieces happening at the same time.
Mhm.
When the pandemic hit to the point that we were going to be impacted as a business, we were already, as IT leaders, myself and my colleagues, preparing for the significant changes in our world that went from the transition into private equity ownership. So when the pandemic hit, the most significant impact for us was really enabling the mobile workforce. When you talk about digital transformation and moving to that digital culture, I think an important point of context to start with is aerospace typically is not a bleeding edge tech industry, not because it doesn't want to be, but because it often can't. So there's all kinds of typical digital transformation technologies that will be buzzwords or trends in the industry. And aerospace often lags behind a little bit because of the level of regulation and frankly, the challenges with deploying some of those tools securely. IoT is a really good example. At our heart, we are a manufacturing company. We make some cool stuff. One of the jokes I always make is, look, I could work in IT for a company that makes furniture. The job would be very similar. Happens that I work for a company that makes some pretty cool technologies, and challenges come with that. Most often in the A&D space, those challenges are around security and how we operate in a regulatory framework. So the digital transformation for us was more about pushing that set of collaboration technologies to our mobile workforce, to the user base. So digital for us really has been about improving the collaboration tool set and driving adoption of that tool set to our increased remote workforce. And that's had a huge impact, frankly, for both productivity, lowering our operating costs. From the user's perspective, our mantra really has always been, we want to deliver access to any application at any time from any device anywhere, right? That's the end goal, and it's challenging to get there. But the pandemic has really pushed us to increase the user adoption of those remote collaboration technologies. And we've been successful in driving a much higher percentage of our workforce to that work from home environment, and in a pretty secure way. So that's been probably our biggest digital focus, has really been around that collaboration technology tool set.
Interesting. Okay, so let me ask you this question, right? Since the pandemic hit, we talk about remote work from home. That's been one of your biggest initiatives, obviously, since March. I read a study on LinkedIn where, and this was a couple months ago, and I've actually said this on some of the other couple episodes, so
Right.
I'm interested to get everybody else's take on it. Because I found it very interesting where it shifted and it changed the mindset where a lot of folks, especially in IT, particularly in IT, feel that they're more effective working from home. So what do you think, from your company's perspective? Do you see that trend being the case where the workforce is more effective now versus when we were in the beginning of the year? And do
I
you
think it
see
can
that
be.
being the case going forward?
Yeah, I do. I think it can be. And I think that, ask anybody who follows the industry trends, and the assumption has been we're 2 to 5 years away from moving to a more digitally capable remote workforce. And what the pandemic has done, at least from my perspective and in our company, it has accelerated the move to increase that technology set. For us, there's been a big focus on how do we do it securely, but absolutely. So again, if I come back to it, we're a manufacturing company, at our core. So we will always have a significant production overhead of folks that need to be on the shop floor, in the building, doing what they need to do so we're getting product at the door. But as you can imagine, there's a very significant percentage of our workforce that we call knowledge workers, and those are the folks that we can enable to work from home. So I can give you some pretty good examples. We've got companies of 400 to 500 employees, let's say, specifically in North America, where previously we might have between 50 and 100 users enabled to work from home. Well, since February, that number has shifted to that company of 500 people. We've now got 250 to 300 people effectively working from home. And in our world, I think the place we're going to land at is a lot of those people have been so effective, we will look at changing our long-term policy so that they can stay working from home. Not all of them, but so we've seen that work very effectively. And specifically in IT, interestingly enough, when we talk about IT service delivery, our core service delivery teams have actually been less distracted while working from home, and in many cases more productive. I think some of that comes from the environment. You're in the building, you get drop-ins, hey, can you help me fix a problem, as opposed to enter a ticket and follow it through to resolution. So I think there's a combination of factors, but overall, I would agree with you completely. And I do think that this pandemic has impacted the speed of that digital transformation.
Sure. So let me ask you this, Jeff, because talking about data security, talking about remote work from home, and being with your extensive knowledge, in the introduction, I talked about your background in cybersecurity.
Yep.
And how your company is more regulated when it comes to cybersecurity.
Yes.
So I imagine, let's say you have these employees working from home now. For the most part, we know that sometimes our biggest weaknesses is our own workforce, right?
Yes.
They're using their own either a company issued device, maybe, or they're using their own personal device, and they're not aware as you and I are when it comes to best practices. When logging in VPN or having to
Right.
work from home, they leave their laptop open and their spouse comes in and they're checking their own personal Gmail accounts or whatever the case may be.
Right.
They're not aware that they shouldn't be doing that, especially if they're into the VPN tunnel at that time and they never logged out. So Talk to me about data security, how you guys are managing that, especially with all the regulations that you guys face in your industry.
Yeah, this one's quite a rabbit hole, but it's an incredibly relevant topic.
Well, you know what, Jeff? It's gonna help somebody. Whatever your response is gonna be to that question,
Absolutely.
I'm sure that people are that's gonna be the substance right there we were talking about.
So, I'll get into a little bit of the regulatory framework in which we operate, because it is significantly different. But to hit your point about mobile workforce, one of our biggest challenges and concerns when we were shifting to this mode, right? It's going to be a pandemic. We're going to be closing facilities. We have to send people home. What are the priorities there? And for us, there were really two priorities, and I would expect anybody in the A&D space is going to have those same priorities. The first priority is obviously how do we maintain business operations? So effectively, it's like you're invoking your BCP. You're getting into the business continuity plan. What do you have to do to stay operational? And then the second priority for us was, how do we ensure that that operation remotely is going to happen securely? It's an unfortunate fact in the world of cybersecurity that one of your biggest risks are your own users. There are a host of vulnerabilities and vectors that can get exploited. You mentioned some of them, and having an appropriate acceptable use policy that everyone understands and has signed off on, and frankly, having the right level of user education and interaction is critical. And one of our biggest concerns was really about driving that attitude to the remote workforce. I mentioned before we had a smaller percentage of folks working from home, and we focused all the time on user education. What are they doing? Why are they doing it? How do they do it? Monitoring that it's being done correctly and making sure that the user base is educated. The challenge that COVID gave us was we're now introducing orders of magnitude higher number of users that need to exploit and continue with those good behaviors. So making sure that our IT teams are accessible and connected and driving those behaviors was a pretty big challenge for us. And we comfortably managed that situation. But when you think about the larger set of concerns, that was actually one of our bigger ones, is not that we have the right tools in place, because frankly, we had the right tools. It was about making sure the people that were using those tools were using them the right way. And that's a good segue into some of the data security concerns. Jonathan, are you familiar with any of the typical aerospace and defense regulations? I know you and I spoke previously about some of the finance regs that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of aerospace and defense background on how?
So at a very high level, when it comes to my other accounts that I deal with that are similar in your space,
right.
I can kind of understand what their regulatory requirements are in terms of like DDoS mitigation, for example, when we talk about those type of issues. But it's at a very high level. So I'd love for you to drill down slightly a little bit more.
So the finance world is actually a pretty good analogy, because finance companies obviously are concerned. They're concerned about protecting their data, right? They've got a lot of sensitive data, and they're concerned about vulnerabilities from having that data exploited. And today, a business's data is its most valuable commodity. So in the aerospace world, companies are typically doing business with federal agencies. So there's certainly a list of best practices, but the difference is in the aerospace and defense community, those best practices are basically mandated into your contractual terms. And that has changed significantly over the last 20 years from, it used to be that you would engage with a federal agency, and in the contract, it would actually say, you should do all these things. Well, today it's different. It says, you must do all these things, and you will actually be audited to make sure that you are doing all these things. And just to give you some context, we talk about Cobham as a company, and if you go look on our website, we do some really cool stuff. All kinds of government agency business, specifically, lots of countries, but also very specifically in the US. We're a commercial organization, right? So we've got a bit of our company that does all the top secret cool stuff. But the part that I work with is the commercially facing organization. So no restricted stuff, no TS stuff, but we deal with what's called CUI all the time. And that stands for, if you've heard the acronym or not, it's Controlled Unclassified Information. So what is that? That's data that the government is going to care about. It's not necessarily restricted, it's not necessarily secret, but it's still very sensitive data that you've got to protect. So a good analogy is a finance company worrying about all its, personal data. We're worried about what's called controlled unclassified information. That very often, obviously, you want to protect your own intellectual property because it's very important. Well, controlled unclassified information is what you are mandated to protect when you're doing business with government agencies. So if we go back to, I believe it was around 2003, there was a document published, and you'll hear this talked about in security circles. It's called the NIST 800-171. NIST refers to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they came out with a special publication that basically governs how you should protect controlled, unclassified information. It's really a set of standards that define how to safeguard and distribute and protect this sensitive data. And now, so the NIST 800-171 is a very good benchmark for best practice, but it is also a requirement if you're going to be doing business with federal government agencies, DOD, GSA, etc. And the NIST is actually a great reference point for anybody who's concerned about cybersecurity, whether you adopt all of its recommendations or you just use it as a guideline. It's a really, really widely used baseline, and it's broken into different families. So the NIST talks about things like access control, right? Who should access the data? How do they get it? Awareness and training. It talks about configuration management, talks about identification, authentication, incident response, maintenance, media protection, physical protection. Who's allowed in your server room? How do you control that access? Personnel security. I'm leaving out a couple. Risk assessments. Talks about security assessments, system and communications protection plans, system and information integrity. All the things that should fit into a reasonably mature information security program, the NIST spells out in detail. And that's effectively the framework that companies like the one I currently work for and pretty much everybody else in that space is required to adhere to today. And that has changed over the years. And now it is effectively mandated that you adhere to that set of guidelines.
Right. So, as you're talking, what triggered in my mind was we did an episode with David Robinson, who's the CEO of DSM out in Lakeland, Florida.
Okay.
He has a data center. So, one of the things when we talk about cybersecurity is, we talk about like CGIS compliant, being CGIS compliant for a lot of government type of accounts that we're associated with, affiliated with. His data center in Winter Haven, for example, when we have a Cloud Connect that goes to an account that has to be CGIS compliant, there's a certain person that has to be certified to even walk you through the data center. Things like that, right? I would assume is what you're hinting towards, right, Jeff?
It's really about the level of maturity of your information security program. And again, it's going to be a bit different for a company like ours in the aerospace and defense arena that is doing business with all these federal agencies. But even when it's not mandated, it's really recognized as best practice. We're at an interesting point right now in the whole cybersecurity arena, because as I mentioned before, it used to be, hey, you should do all these things. Then in 2017, it turned into, okay, you have to do all these things if you want to do business with us. And now, effective in 2020, there's a new maturity model definition. So there's a new set of acronyms. I apologize for all the acronyms. We could talk all day long with acronyms. There's one that you're going to hear soon if you haven't heard it already, and it's called CMMC. That stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And what it is, it's a relatively new standard for implementing these cybersecurity recommendations across all of the defense industrial base. So all of the companies, but 300,000 different companies in the supply chain that does business as defense contractors for the government. And what this CMMC is really, it's the government's response to some pretty significant compromises over the last number of years of sensitive defense information. So previously, contractors were absolutely, responsible for implementing and monitoring and certifying your information security plan. What the introduction of CMMC does is it changes that by requiring third-party assessments of your compliance. So again, before it was, here's some good stuff to do, you should do it. Then it was, now you have to do all this. Now it's, you have to do it, and we're going to check to make sure that you're doing it. So there's a whole evolution towards a much clearer understanding of how mature a company's information security plan should be. And obviously, it's related to the industry that they're in. And aerospace and defense, lots of intellectual property to protect, lots of government data to protect. We're going to be required to maintain a higher level of maturity than, a mom and pop restaurant down the street is obviously not going to go to that same level. But again, coming back to the finance chat we had, pretty comparable, just a different level of requirement.
Okay, so you've given me a lot to work with, Jeff. Here's the thing, right? My whole premise of this series and why I started this, being in sales, I talk to your peers often, right? And they're asking me that you may have seen this on some of the previous episodes if you watched it, to say there's 3 buckets that I categorize accounts in now. Even when I'm talking to a new prospect, I try to figure out what is the bucket they fit in. One, they're either already, the dust is settled, they're innovating, they're moving forward with ideas, so they're contacting me to say, hey, how can you help me with these initiatives? Great, that's a great spot to be in. The second place is they're kind of still in a pause mode. They're kind of waiting to see. There's a lot of economic uncertainty, so they don't necessarily, they feel like they're comfortable. Let's just put things on pause. That's okay. The third bucket, though, is the worst bucket, and that's what I fear. And this is the reason why I created this series. Is that's the IT professional that has all these great ideas, right? And they maybe even are aware of some of the different policies and procedures and compliances and what we already spoke about. But there's a challenge where, financially speaking, they don't want to move forward. They're afraid to even suggest it. Afraid to even imagine walking into the CFO's office and saying, hey, I know that there's all this economic uncertainty, but we should be spending X amount of dollars on these things that we just spoke about, the things that you just spoke about. But they're afraid to bring that up because they're going to get chewed out. So talk to me about, because in the intro, we talked about your on the business side, you have that knowledge, and also on the technical side, you have that knowledge. So what are some of the tips that we can share with that one IT pro that's watching this, that is saying, hey, I want to do these things, but how can I implement that in my organization with what we're already doing?
That's a great question, Jonathan. I think you touch on a couple different points there that I might like to make, because I've been in that seat as well. And again, some context. In the aerospace and defense arena, we're a little bit privileged when it comes from building our security budget, because much of this stuff comes from a place where there's no debate. We have to do it. So frequently, when we are talking about implementing new tools, if they fall into that security space, it's an easier conversation with the CFO and the CEO, because we are mandated to do it from a regulatory perspective. However, everything else does often fall into that, companies are reducing and eliminating technical debt. They're trying to increase their agility, and how can we help them deliver some competitive advantage? How do we adopt new services in a world where IT is continually being pressured to basically deliver more with less? And so, my growth through this set of companies has always been very pressured on money and budget and spend. And I can tell you the conversations I've had over the years around CapEx and OpEx get tiring. And there's some opportunities there for people to leverage their experience and their innovation. I'll tell you where I'm going. I mean, continually getting asked to deliver more effective services and solutions with less budget is certainly frustrating. But I can tell you, again, from my experience, any IT leader, I don't care if it's a manager, a director, a VP, CIO, doesn't matter what level you're at. I believe you need to earn the chance to deliver extra value, because I've worked in all kinds of business units, divisions, sectors, locations where there's zero budget. It's gone, right? There's no OPEX, there's no CAPEX. You got what you got, keep the wheels on the bus. And I think, unfortunately, too many of us have operated in that world. But as an IT leader, you have the opportunity to earn the chance to deliver extra value. And step one is keep the lights on, right? Do your job, deliver what you are expected to deliver, keep the wheels on the bus, deliver an effective function. That gets you a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. Once you have that seat at the table, that's the point where your skills and experience can really pay off, because it's not just about IT skills. The biggest gap that I see, frankly, is not enough understanding of the business, right? You can know everything there is to know about IT, but to deliver effective value as an IT leader, you need to understand the business. What are the challenges the business has? What problems do they need solved that they might not know that they need solved? How can you deliver value in IT that might eliminate a business process bottleneck? The only way that you can actually deliver those solutions is by understanding what you do in IT, but also understanding what the business really needs. So earning that seat at the table is step one. Step two is really learning and understanding how the business operates and how you can help. And that's the point at which you can start delivering value. I don't know enough IT leaders who think, how can I deliver value back to the shareholders?
Right.
Because that's what the business cares about at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
You've got things you have to do, but what is the core message? It's deliver value back to the shareholders. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's no budget. Maybe you can't do anything. That's not true. There's always a budget when you can prove the return on investment. If I want to go spend $5 million on a project next week and there's zero budget, and I pitch it the wrong way, it's not going anywhere. But if I can show you, yeah, that's $5 million we got to find to do this, but I'm going to save you $12 million in the next 3 years because we do this, guess what? That's getting green-lit. And that's based on your understanding of the business and how you can deliver a solution to solve a problem. So I think there's still opportunity, but you've got to really leverage your experience to exploit it.
I just got, it's funny. I'm going to edit that part right there and use that as the promo, because let me tell you, I got goosebumps when you said that. I honestly believe that's, adding value is the key. Not only, even in my perspective, in my seat, right? Being a sales professional and talking to, your peers and being able to have these conversations, where do I add value is the key. So interesting take on, flipping it around, seeing from your perspective, how do you add value to the company when you're presenting an idea? And I think that is going to be critical and key for the person watching this that's struggling with how to innovate and foster innovation with going through this crisis. Think about how you can add value to the business.
Correct.
That way you can get your ideas and point across.
I mean,
very key point that you said that. I'm so happy you said it.
Back to having a seat at the table. And the other part of context that's valuable is, getting that seat at the table. So who are you talking to? Are you a systems analyst who's talking to the IT manager to try to get a budget to develop your new tool? Are you the IT manager that's talking to the IT director? Are you the IT director that's talking to the VP? Or are you the VP that has a seat at the table with the CEO? Or, it also comes down, unfortunately, sometimes to the politics of your company. Who does IT report into, right? You get IT in so many places where IT is actually owned by either the COO or the CFO, and you're never going to talk to the CEO. Companies like that, you'll typically see a more budget, cost center focused approach to IT.
Sure.
In companies, it's been my experience that in companies that are particularly innovative and develop really cool solutions, you'll often see IT reporting at the C level with either a CIO who sat next to the CEO who appreciates the value of IT. So it can also be the perception, right? Is IT an enabler of value, or is it a cost center? And I think in too many places today, IT is still viewed as a cost center. But if you are in one of those places, it's your job to flip that perception to IT as a cost center to IT is actually delivering value. And it's a mindset, right? It's something that you really have to embrace, and it doesn't happen overnight, but you can change it. Doesn't matter where you are in that chain of command, you can change that mindset in your own company. So a lot of it, I think, comes down to having a positive influence on your culture.
So you hear that, guys. Know what your structure is in terms of your organization and understand how you play that role. And then that's how you can figure out where you can add value and innovate with your ideas. So thank you, Jeff, for saying that. So we talked a lot about the technical side, right?
Absolutely.
I want to pivot for a second to the business side, right? Because you're going to have those folks that step up and step out and that are creative and that are able to innovate and share ideas. Because like you said, they're no longer you guys are no longer just the IT gals and guys, right? Because you have now a prominent seat at the table, business decisions are being made based on your input. So you're going to have these people that are now going to shine and that are going to be looked at in a different way and going to have more value and have a more important role in the organization. So from a business perspective, how do we keep and retain this type of talent, right? Because now people are going to start looking for that. There's going to be organizations that say, hey, we're going to need IT folks to be able to have this competitive edge. And how do they're going to be starting to look for the top talent. So from your role, how do you retain top talent?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That I look at that sometimes a little bit cynically because while we do want to foster innovation and encourage the development of our internal talent, we've also got to be very careful of the risk that comes along with a phrase I'm sure you've heard, shadow IT. So you will often find in an organization that's grown to a certain level of complexity, there's a pretty significant conflict between the R&D and engineering team with all the smart guys that want to go pedal to the metal and introduce all kinds of new solutions next week to help the business, that are smart guys that know what they're doing, and these security and IT teams who are challenged with how do we control the environment and do it in a secure way. So speaking just from my own personal experience, in the aerospace and defense space, most of our innovators fall into that, engineering R&D space where these guys have fabulous ideas that they often don't get to implement because of the regulatory and security controls that they're working under. So if I'm being honest, it's a challenge for us to keep those teams properly engaged, and it's a balance that we have to strike with, how do we securely develop and deploy some of these incredibly innovative solutions in a way that doesn't compromise our necessary security model? It's a challenge. It's been one that I'm faced with, frankly, countless times. It's been my experience that developing that IT talent in the IT teams is really about, keeping those guys and girls engaged with the right tools, which on the positive side of aerospace and defense, we do get to work with some pretty sophisticated tools, right? Anybody that's in the IT space would be pretty happy to work with some of the kind of leading edge security and cybersecurity tool sets and companies that we work with. So we're usually pretty good at retaining that talent. Again, the analogy I used before, right? You could work in IT for a company that makes furniture, not that there's anything wrong with that, or you could work for a company that does really, really cool bleeding edge science stuff. It tends to be a bit of a competitive advantage in keeping our employees engaged when we can go, hey, that SpaceX rocket that just launched, we had 85 components on that. Isn't that cool? Right. So I think we're a little privileged to be able to attract and retain some of that talent just based on the reputation of our company.
By the way, that was pretty cool.
Agreed, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, awesome. All right, well, so as we wind down here, Jeff, I appreciate what you're saying here, and I think that this has been full of just nuggets and nuggets for folks that are going to be watching this. So, we talked a little bit earlier about IoT and cybersecurity and different things. So, we have these spectacular people working in our organization now. We have top talent here. What are the trends going forward now? At what point, we are here July 15th, right? We're recording this.
Yep.
So we've already been 4 months into this thing. Where do you see, the future, the rest of the year? And what is going to be the biggest trend in enterprise and IT right now? Is it IoT? Is it cybersecurity? Is it something else? What do you think?
Yeah, speaking personally, I can tell you for us, really, it's about keeping the wheels on the bus, making sure that operations are maintained securely. And it's just unfortunate the world that we're in at the moment. We've got a lot of programs and projects and solutions on pause because we are focused on the risk management, and I think a lot of people are today. So, we've got risk management and business continuity plans, and we're making sure that they are both sustainable and appropriate, because I don't think anybody who had a business continuity plan 2 years ago imagined this particular scenario happening as much as you might have, workshopped it. So we're in a place where our significant concerns are around making sure our workforce stays healthy, stays effective, and frankly, making sure that we can appropriately backfill if we need to, while trying to maintain a revenue stream through all these, sophisticated technology companies. So, honestly, I don't think we're in a place where we're going to be deploying anything new and cool in the next 3 to 6 months, and we really are focused on operational stability. That being said, just like every company, we're going through an evolution at the moment. So I look forward to see where that's going to end up.
Yep.
I wish I was a little bit more optimistic about the next 3 to 6 months, but our focus has really just been on operational stability.
Yeah. Okay, so here we go, Jeff. One last question for you here. All right. I'm curious to know, take yourself out of your role.
Yep.
Take yourself out of your company. Okay. Put yourself in the shoes of the guy who is in the business where they're just trying to keep the lights on. Right now. Give me something. Give him one piece of advice. How can he maintain, foster innovation while keeping the lights on?
I'm going to go in a different direction than you might think. And I'm going to go back to something we talked about previously. Learn about the business, develop the business relationships. I don't mean that IT skills should not go on, you shouldn't ignore the continuous growth of your IT skill set. You shouldn't forget about that certification that you were going after. But you know what? Guys and girls with certifications are a dime a dozen. Forging those personal business relationships is what is going to get you closer to the decision makers. I mean, the assumption is you're good at your job because you still have one. So keep being good at your job. Don't stop focusing on what you're expected to deliver, but get out of your comfort space a little bit and go learn about the core function of the business. Maybe spend some time with the finance folks. It's it's not as exciting as learning a new set of IT tools, but I can tell you that from my experience, the people who have those business engagements and relationships and understanding are the ones who are going to last through the periods of disruption. And the closer you are to thinking like the business, the more effective a partner you're going to be in delivering IT solutions to the business. I can't stress that enough. Networking is critical. Knowing the people to call when something goes wrong is critical. Keep the wheels on the bus. Keep doing your job, but get close to the business, and that will help you in the long term.
Let me piggyback real quick, and hopefully you agree with what I'm about to say. I know there was a couple folks something that I found was very interesting in IT, that they actually reached out to the chief marketing officer of the organization and asked and said, hey, how can we help your team be better in marketing?
Yes.
and create, and they collaborated on a couple of ideas and presented together. So the CIO and the CMO went in together to pitch on how we can innovate, and they were able to get their ideas across, because that helped the business, that helped the marketing team sell more, and that helped the IT team understand more how the marketing team played a role and how they can play a role in the success of the overall greater good of the organization.
And especially under today's, specific set of challenges, it's going to be financially challenging for every business to maintain that revenue stream. So anything that you can do to shift your mindset even a little bit in that direction is going to be helpful. And frankly, I think it's going to be recognized. So, all of the be a good corporate citizen stuff goes without saying, but maybe change your perspective a little bit and try to look at your role from the people that you're delivering service to. Put yourself in their shoes. It's hard to do sometimes in IT because we think we know all the answers. And we might know the technology answers, but that's something else that I, say all the time. I don't mean this because it's not always easy, but the technology is easy. I mean, we're smart guys and girls. We can figure out the technology part. If you don't know a skill, you can learn it. That's why you're in this business,
Mhm.
because you are an adaptive learner. The technology part is the easy bit. It's navigating the challenges in the business landscape that sometimes is more difficult.
Well, Jeff, listen, I mean, that's where I want to end it right there, because what you just said, there's a gem, and I'm hoping that people, it resonates with some folks, and I think it will. So, Jeff, I just want to say thank you very much.
Appreciate the time, Jonathan. This has been a
Doing,
good discussion.
thank you, and doing this, I think right now, and when we spoke offline about this, when we set this all up, I think the purpose of this right now is just to help folks that we're friends with, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's no longer about, you're with this company, I'm with that company, we're competitors, or
yep.
I'm trying to get you on the phone to set up a meeting to, talk about your strategic initiatives. I mean, it's more about how can we help our community of people that we're involved with, that we either passed at some point and pass our lives, or that we're going to pass in the future, and come across. How can we help that person
Yep,
get through these
I would agree
times?
completely. Right, our careers are all going to
Yep.
continue to evolve.
Yep.
As a footnote to that, I would certainly encourage any of your audience or anybody that sees this, please feel free to reach out and engage. I have some potentially relevant experience to help in some of these areas, and I'm more than happy to put that on the table to the community. So if
Awesome.
anybody's been through some of these problems or challenges and wants some perspective, I'm more than happy to have a conversation. So don't
Awesome.
hesitate to reach out.
And listen, take that offer. I mean, because this, as you guys can see, this guy's a wealth of knowledge. So, Jeff, listen, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your input. I really appreciate the value you're adding, to the community, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do going forward here. So, thank you
Sounds
very
great.
much.
Really appreciate it. Cheers.
Awesome.